What's up guys, it's Hero here, and today I got you guys a sword and shield build or mix set based off of Teostra's Emblem. This build itself is mainly focused around critical status as well as blast attack and weakness exploit, with a few extra skills being Handicraft, Latent Power, Speed Sharpening, Airborne, as well as Fortify, even though that's not the main focus. These are just the secondary skills. Before we jump into the build itself, I do want to let you guys know, as usual, I always leave a lot of information down in the description. I'll leave the build down there in case you actually don't want to watch the video, but I do recommend watching the showcase so you can at least see what it looks like in action before you start getting the necessary materials to create the mixed set. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to go ahead and start off with is equipment, and starting first is the weapon. The weapon we're going to be using for this build is Teostra's Emblem. The base attack on this beautiful sword and shield is 266. It's going to be staying at 266. Sharpness does max out at blue status, but we will have Handicraft 4, which means it will be in the white status for sharpness. On top of that, we will have 0% affinity, but in the future, if you end up getting an augmentation for sword and shield, I highly recommend throwing a affinity slot into that so you can go ahead and get an easy 10% right off the bat. The elemental status for Teostra's Emblem is blast, which has a base of 240, but by the time we get to the end of this build, you'll have 300. So let's go ahead and talk about armor. You're going to be rocking 3 pieces of Zorah gear and then 2 Kaiser pieces of gear. Based off the pieces alone, you do get a couple of skill factors, which is pretty nice. The skill factors are basically critical status from Zorah's gear, which increases abnormal status effect damage when landing critical hits, and that abnormal status for us is blast. And then there's Latent Power, which we get from the 2 pieces of Kaiser. Temporarily increases affinity and reduces stamina depletion when certain conditions are met. When this is active for us, it increases affinity by 20% and reduces stamina depletion by 10%. Alright, so since you know what skills you're going to get from the equipment, let's go ahead and talk about the equipment itself. For the headpiece, we're going to be using Zorah Headgear Beta, which gives us 1 Handicraft, but it also gives us 1 extra slot. For the chest piece, we're going to be using Zorah Hide Beta, which gives us 2 blast attack and gives us a ability to use a 2-slotted jewel. For the arms, we're going to be using the Kaiser Vambraces Alpha, and it gives us 2 exploit, but it also gives us an ability to get a slot. On top of that, for the waist, we're going to be using Zorah's Spine, which gives us Fortify, but it also gives us an ability to use a 2-slotted jewel. For the last part, we're going to be using Kaiser Greaves Alpha, which gives us Latent Power 2 and 1 blast attack. And for the charm, we're going to be using Handicraft 3, and for our 2 mantle slots, I prefer Apothecary Mantle and a affinity booster. You can use whatever you want, but this is what I highly recommend. Alright, so now that you have the equipment, let's go ahead and talk about the slots and the jewels you'll be using for these slots. So the first slot you're going to go ahead and use up is the Zorah Headgear Beta slot, which we're going to be throwing a Speed Sharpening jewel into this, which is also known as Grinder Jewel. For the Zorah Hide B, which is the chest piece, we're going to be using a Tenderizer Jewel 2, which gives us 2 extra weakness exploit. Now I know you guys are probably like, whoa, doesn't that give us 4 overall? It only maxes out at 3. That is the case, but we don't have a choice because we want to max out weakness exploit, and there's really not another way without sacrificing gear, which we don't want to do. For the Kaiser Vambraces, you're going to go ahead and put a Grinder Jewel in here, which is Speed Sharpening, which if you remember, we've already put a Speed Sharpening Jewel on the Zorah Headgear, which means we basically get to skip 2 cycles from the sharpening process, easy mode. On top of that, we do have the Zorah Spine Beta, which we are going to be putting the Flight Jewel 2 inside of this, which gives us Airborne. Airborne increases the damage caused by jumping attacks, which is going to be 10%. So now you're going to be breaking limbs for days. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the skill information that some of you guys may not understand. So right off the bat, we have critical status, which we get from Zorah's set. If you remember, this increases abnormal status effect damage. Our status effect damage is blast, and this only happens when we land critical hits. Now on top of that, we do have weakness exploit, which increases affinity of attacks that exploit a monster's weak spot. That's 50% affinity right there, okay? On top of that, we do get Latent Power, which if it does activate, we do get an increased affinity by 20%. So 50 plus 20, that's 70 freaking percent. Now we're not done, we're not done. On top of that, if you remember our Teostra's emblem, we can get an augmentation. If you do get this augmentation, that's 80% if you do get the affinity augmentation. Wait, we're not done. On top of that, you can get the affinity booster, which increases your affinity by 50%. It gives you a buff. Now, the thing is about this is a timed buff. The effect duration of it is 60 seconds. Now, we're not done. If you stay within this affinity booster the whole entire time, even after the smoke goes out, you can basically last for around 80 seconds. So if you think about that, that's 100% and more just for affinity. And wait, there's more. On top of that, if you do get the Apothecary Mantle, it increases your chance of applying status effects. In simpler terms, that means you're about to be hitting crits for fucking days. Yeah, so hopefully you're hearing this full potential that you have with this build. Now on top of that, the secondary skills are actually very useful. Plus 40 weapon sharpness, that really does come in handy. That gets you in white status, which means you got white, blue, and then you gotta get to green. And you can easily get that white status back because we have level 2 speed sharpening, which removes 2 cycles of the sharpening process, which means easy mode. Yes. On top of that, we do have Airborne, and you can do a lot of attacks in the air with the sword and shield. You can do the impact attack, which gives you a chance of breaking a piece of the monster. If you hit him in the head, even better. Diablo's horns, gone. Wings from Rathian or Rathalos, gone. Zorah Rathalos, gone. Guys, this build's great. It's really useful. I definitely recommend using it in a group, and if you want to use it in solo, even better. On top of that, you do get Fortify, and if you're a guy that likes to die, Fortify gives you an increased attack by 10% and also defense by 15% with each use. You can only stack twice, so that means you can increase your attack by 20% if you die twice. Now, I don't recommend going for that as a strategy, but I don't know you, so I mean, if that's something you want to do, all power to you. But yeah. Now I highly recommend you get proficient with the sword and shield before you actually jump right into this. If you're not proficient with it, you're not going to really do all that well with it. I highly recommend checking out a video down below. This video is made by Arquez or Aerox or something like that gaming. He basically had a very basic type of video showing you how to use the sword and shield. Without the video, it only took me like a day to learn how to use the sword and shield. So if you want to be a solo YOLO kind of guy, go for it. If you couldn't keep up with my speaking, as usual, look in the description. I usually go out in full-fledged detail down in the description. This is my first kind of build type of video. If it didn't come out right or it wasn't good for you, I apologize. It was my first time. Big shout out to Veru for helping me create this build. Anyways, enjoy the showcase. Stay frosty, and there's more to come.